بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to part 2 of Islam in the Environment. Inshallah, today we're going to be building on what we did last time. Just by show of hands, who was here last class? Okay, good majority of people. Some people haven't, so no worries. Inshallah, we're going to give a quick recap. So last week, we had an idea, it's a framework, it's a belief, it's a system of how you operate. It's things that you not only believe in, but you act upon it, and it's a way to guide you. So we said Islamic environmental ethics is a framework derived from the Quran and Sunnah, and we talked about a couple of ayat and hadith that fed into this. So inshallah, if you haven't got a chance, if you really want to go back and recap this, you can. I'm sure it's going to get posted on YouTube at some point, so you can go check it out. But this is part 2, so we're going to be building on this. Last week, we talked about what is Islamic environmental ethics and why it's important. So we also went through the why. So we went through 2 case studies. We said somebody who lives without Islamic environmental ethics and what are the characteristics of somebody like that, and we gave some examples on it. And what is somebody who lives with Islamic environmental ethics, and we gave some characteristics on that. So we're going to start off today with a little bit of challenge. Okay, brothers versus sisters here. I'm going to ask you guys, for the people that were here, to come up with what were the 5 qualities of each of them. So brothers, you guys are going to start first. We're going to go over what are the 5 qualities that we identified in somebody who lives without Islamic environmental ethics. It'll make me feel really good about myself if we get all 5. But of course, I know that it's been a week. But let's go over what are some of the qualities. If somebody who does not live with Islamic environmental ethics, what are the qualities of somebody like that? Just raise your hand. I saw a lot of hands that were here last week. Okay, bismillah. Selfishness, that was one. Great. So selfishness was a big characteristic of somebody who does not live with Islamic environmental ethics. We talked about how they can't think about anyone but themselves, and everything they do is for their own benefit without rather society. Yes? Greed. Greed was a massive one. Greed was how they it was how they rationalized doing things in a way that just did more. I need more at the expense of everything around them. Great. Okay, there was 3 more. Okay, I can't keep going. Sisters are gonna get your turn. Don't worry. This is the brothers are gonna do the without. You guys are gonna do the with. So start brainstorming from now. All right, brothers, come on. We can do this. I know we can. We said greed, selfishness, and a lot of them were linked. If somebody does not live in Islamic environment, they don't care about the environment, they don't operate it. There are 5 characteristics we talked about last time. We got 2. Okay, at least 1 more, guys. I know we can do this. I mean, you can help. Don't worry. Overconsumption, great. So overconsumption was another one. It was obsessive need to follow your nafs, and your nafs says buy this, buy that, and you keep buying it. Okay, so I'll leave the brothers no more. I won't keep pressuring you guys. So we talked about those 2. So the other 2 that we didn't mention were wastefulness and being destructive. So I know everyone's like, oh, you remember it now. But yes, these are some of the characteristics. So we talked about greed, selfishness, overconsumption, wasteful, and destructive. All of these, we have some examples on them. We can't go through all of them right now, but these are just general characteristics. Okay, sisters, let's do this. All right, what are some of the characteristics that we talked about somebody who lives with Islamic environmental ethics? Mindfulness? Was mindfulness one of them? I don't think so. It was close. It was very close. It was very close. It starts with an M. Moderation, exactly. Yes, moderation. So somebody who understands that there is contentment and in knowing that what you have. Were you here last week? No, great. See, you don't have to be here last week to know all the characteristics of somebody who lives with Islamic environmental ethics. Okay, what are the ones, sister? Selflessness. Yes. Easy way is think about some of the opposites of the ones on the board already. So we typed moderation, selflessness. Okay, what other ones? Conscious. Think about some of the opposites of on the right side. If somebody is like that, what are they? Okay, 1 more. I'll give you guys 1 more. The brothers got 3. Like, you know. We're good? All right. I'll stop pressuring you guys. Last chance. Sustainability, yes, is linked to it. It's opposite of destructive. Somebody who's not destructive is productive. Wow, you didn't come last class, but you, mashallah, you know this. All right, so productive, selflessness, humility, moderation, and then ultimately caring. All of these are very related, but again, these are some of the characteristics that we identified, and we gave examples of what it means to somebody who lives with Islamic environmental ethics, why caring is a big part of it, why humility, they understand that, listen, I'm content with what I have. I don't need bigger, better things. Alhamdulillah, I live knowing that I feel like this is okay for me. And also the selflessness, knowing that they can never benefit from something, knowing that somebody else is being harmed by it. So that was another characteristic. And the last one was productive, which was the opposite of destructive. Somebody who was willing to take something knowing that it was going to harm people. This person goes out of their way to be a productive Muslim, which is part of the characteristics we talked about. The Prophet ﷺ said, the Muslim is somebody who people are at peace from both their speech and their hands. Okay? So now that we've talked about the what is it and why is it, today we're going to focus on two other things. We're going to focus on how to even establish this. I think last week with a little bit of theory. It was trying to understand it as a principle, as concepts. But this week, inshallah, we're going to just bring it home by really giving some practical tips on how to actually put it into our lives. We'll go over some scenarios, and then at the end, we'll talk about how to maintain it. Because none of this matters if I'm just here saying good things, making you guys all feel good, making you guys care about the environment for 30 minutes, and then we all go home and none of this matters. So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about how to establish Islamic environmental ethics, so how do you build that relationship between Islam and the environment, and then finally, we're going to talk about how to maintain it. Okay? Ready to go? All right, Bismillah. So, how to establish Islamic environmental ethics. So, I started off with this hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu قال Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Iman, faith, has over 70 branches or 60 branches. The most excellent of which is the declaration that there is no God but Allah, saying La ilaha illallah. And the humblest of it is the removal of something that can cause injury from the path, and modesty is a branch of faith. So I wanted to start off with this hadith because part of what we're going to do to try to establish Islamic environmental ethics here is to understand that this is part of our worship. And when we say iqamah, when we talk about establishment, we're not talking about just performing. I didn't think to practice Islamic environmental ethics. I want us to get to a point where we establish it. And what does establishment mean? It means that it stands as a pillar within our lives. Like when we talk about iqam as-salah is not just performing prayer. You don't just pray, but you establish prayer where anywhere you are, if salah comes in, what do? You pray it. Right? In the same way that inshallah, when we talk about Islamic environmental ethics, part of what we're trying to do here is understand it's also a branch of faith. And the Prophet ﷺ said it is the most humbling one. It's the one that is, even the lowest level. So we're trying to understand that we need to think of this as a form of worship. And the other thing I wanted to highlight from this hadith is that, we talk about removing harm from the road. And this is also linked to another hadith the Prophet ﷺ says in Bukhari Muslim, where he said there was a man walking in Jannah. And this man was enjoying and walking in Jannah because this man was walking and he saw a thorny branch in the road and he removed it because he said, I do not want other Muslims to be harmed by this. And as a result, Allah accepted that action and forgave his sins. And I wanted to connect these two because sometimes we belittle our own actions. We think that sometimes if we just remove something, it's not really going to impact people. But this hadith shows us that, listen, even if you removed one piece of harmful thing from the road, that could be your key to Jannah, right? And the overall premise here of trying to make the world a more habitable place, not only for the creation of Allah, but your fellow human beings. So really understand that really what we're trying to do when we're establishing this Islamic environmental ethics is that we're trying to make the world a better place at the end of the day. And in this hadith, Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that even if you do it in the smallest of ways, you will get rewarded for it. And that could be your key to Jannah. So do not underestimate the power of any action. So that's how we're going to go into this mindset with establishing our Islamic environmental ethics. I'm going to give you guys 3 principles of how to establish it. Okay, 3 principles. Each of these principles, I'm going to go through them based on a hadith or an ayah, and then we're going to follow it up with a question that we should ask ourselves at any crossroads when it comes to that principle. Okay? We'll go principle by principle, and then we'll talk about them, and then we'll move to the next one. and then we'll go into the scenario questions after. Okay, so the first principle I want you all to remember, and this is a very key component to talking about Islamic environmental ethics, is the concept of a khalifa. So a khalifa, when we talk about stewardship, is really one of the, when you hear anyone talk about Islam in the environment, you rarely ever hear that speech without the word khalifa. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a steward of the earth as a Muslim? And these ayat from Surah Al-Baqarah are some of the ones that are commonly referenced. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَقَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in Surah Al-Baqarah, remember when your Lord said to the angels, I'm going to place a khalifa on the earth. They asked Allah, will you place in it someone who will spread corruption there and shed blood while we glorify your praises and proclaim your holiness? Allah responded, and I know what you do not know. So these ayat are commonly referenced when we talk about the concept of what it means to be a khalifa, because Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking to the angels. And the angels are saying, are you going to put people on this earth knowing that they're going to cause corruption? And Allah Azza wa Jalla responds to them by saying, I know what you do not know. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla is referring to us at this point that Allah Azza wa Jalla knows that there's going to be people who do good and there's people who do bad. And not understanding that being a khalifa ultimately is a responsibility of being a caretaker. And by taking on this responsibility, we as khalifas have that understanding that this is something that Allah has entrusted to us. We are not the creators. We are not the masters of anything around us. But what we are is that we have this momentary responsibility, this caretakership, this stewardship over what Allah has trusted us. And if you remember some of the ayat and hadith that we talked about last week, which is everything that Allah has created is part of His infinite wisdom. Nothing has been created without a purpose. And by us understanding that Allah has created everything with a purpose, and that Allah has created us also with a divine purpose, and that part of our purpose is that we are khalifas, we are stewards of this earth, that our job is to safeguard the other creation of Allah. And this ayah and this principle of being a khalifa really drives the point home of us understanding that we have an obligation, a responsibility to everyone around us whenever we're living in our current day-to-day. So the question that I want you guys and everyone all to think about whenever you're at a crossroad when it comes to this principle is, I want you guys to ask yourselves, who is this going to harm? By doing this action, who is this going to harm? Because as a caretaker and as a khalifa, if you're at a crossroads and you ask yourself, is this going to harm somebody else or is this going to harm anyone? That should help guide you in what decision you should make. Okay? So that's principle number one. Principle number two is the concept of mizan, balance. So the document that I keep referencing actually as part of my research in this is there's a document called Al-Mizan. I highly recommend any of you to go home and research it. It's called Al-Mizan. It's a document put together by some of the leading researchers and scholars on Islam in the environment. And they put it together and it's called Al-Mizan, the covenants. And they thought this principle was so key that they literally named the document after it. And it has so many great elements on Islam and the environment, so I highly recommend it. But when we're talking about here for this principle, the ayahs that are commonly referenced are from Surah Al-Rahman, where Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ وَالْأَرْضَ وَضَعَهَا لِلْأَنَامِ. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in Surah Al-Rahman, and He set up the balance, al-mizan, so that you may not exceed the balance. Weigh with justice and do not fall short in the balance. And the earth has spread out for all living creatures. Okay, this one, I'm going to go a little bit deeper in it. I've been trying to hold myself back from getting too science and technically, so bear with me for a little bit. But the al-mizan in this point is talking a lot, Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking to us in the concept of everything, as we said, was created with purpose. And we talked about last week about like the food chain system, right? How the invertebrates, the insects are fed upon by primary consumers and then the secondary consumers, and everything is really this complex food map that exists to build an ecosystem. And that everything you see is in perfect balance. Even when Allah Azza wa Jalla describes things in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla describes the night and the day. Allah Azza wa Jalla describes the sun and the moon, the earth and skies, everything in perfect balance and harmony, right? And part of our understanding as Muslims, as caretakers, Khalifas, is trying to maintain and not disrupt this balance. And one of the things that I always, have to battle with and kind of engage with when you're doing this conversation, this climate talk, is that somebody will come up to you and say, you know what, Hashem, I don't really believe in this climate change stuff. And I say, like, why? They say, Hashem, climate has been changing since the beginning of time. Oh. Climate has been changing since the beginning of time. Why are you telling me that climate change is a factor now? Why are you telling me that what we're doing now is causing problems? And this is actually a very common myth that has been perpetuated kind of mostly because people just, when you look at things, like trying to find a storyline, you will find it. But like the science on this and even the understanding of what's happening right now is clear that human beings are the ones causing this imbalance, in the sense that when human beings started, really building things, it was the Industrial Revolution. And when that happened, really what they were doing was transforming and creating, and there was a lot of pollution that was caused as a result. And as a result, from that time till now, there has been so much change in the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide and all these things. And what that does is it disrupts a lot of cycles. The biggest of them being the carbon cycle, which is that the way things get stored, break down, get consumed, and then it comes back around. All of this happens in an ecosystem, in a balance that's happening for generations, millions of years. But right now, at this current point, this is the highest point where CO2 has been in the atmosphere in 2 million years. Why? Because of human-caused climate change. This is all because of human activity and what we're doing. And this has so many different impacts where, as human beings, we need to be very cognizant of our impact on that mizan, on the balance. And the beautiful thing about al-mizan here, it also it relates to justice, right? Like true mizan, when Allah created the mizan, there's justice in it, and that everything has its right, everything has its place. So by taking something from somewhere, you're misplacing something in another place. When you're extracting and exploiting a resource from one area, you're depleting another area. When you're taking resources out of the ground and you're using it and you're putting it somewhere else, you're depriving it from its original location. And part of what we talked about last week was also that, part of being a good Muslim is being somebody who walks gently, somebody who does not cause devastation and destruction wherever they go. So by trying to live our lives in a way that maintains this balance, that is how we truly maintain this mizan. And the question that I have for us to ask is, whenever you're about to make a decision on something, ask, what is this taking away from for my benefit? So whenever you're at a decision point, I want you to ask yourself, for me to get this benefit, who is losing out in this? Because that will tell you, and that will give you an understanding of the mizan of what actually needs to happen when you're trying to apply your Islamic environmental ethics there. The third and final principle that I want us to highlight today so we can understand it is amana. So amana, I'm not going to call it trust because amana is a lot more comprehensive than trust, and we'll get more into it. But in Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَنْ يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانُ إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. Indeed, we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, and they declined to bear it and feared it. But man undertook it, bared it. Indeed, he was unjust and ignorant. So I spent a lot of time researching this ayah, and this ayah, subhanAllah, has a long tafsir. But the areas that I want to really focus on is this concept of what does it mean to bear the amana that Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking about in this ayah. So Mufassirun, and based on the narrations from Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says the amana in this ayah is referred to is the obligations that Allah Azza wa Jalla has put on Allah Azza wa Jalla has put on mankind. And I found a really great article, Islamic Beliefs, depository of knowledge from Mufti Bilal Umarjeen, and he actually does a great explanation of amana. And I'm going to be using that to kind of explain what I'm talking about when I'm saying amana in the environment in Islam sense. So he says that the amana actually has two parts. The trust that needs to be honored to the Creator, and the trust that needs to be honored to the creation, right? So he says that, there's an amana, there's a level of obligation and trust that you must have. There's one to Allah Azza wa Jal, and there's one to the creation. And you need to do your best to try to fulfill those obligations and that trust to them. So what does that mean? He says that the amana can actually be broken up into 4 parts. He says that the amana ultimately has the level of trust. Are you operating and living in a way that fulfills the trust, in a trustworthy way that fulfills the trust between you and Allah? What does that mean? Allah Azza wa Jalla has showed us countless times in the Quran that we have been given the responsibility to safeguard the environment, to be kind to it, to be kind to the creation of Allah, to take it as a sign from Him, right? And part of that obligation that Allah Azza wa Jalla that we have with that creation is to show gratitude. We said somebody who does not live within Islamic environmental ethics is ungrateful. They're excessive. They overconsume. But somebody who lives in Islamic environmental ethics has humility. They're grateful. They're content with what they have. So that's the first part. So the other element is also related to the Khalifa element, which is the responsibility. The amana, and that's why some people say that the leadership is a trust between you and the things that you're leading. So there's an inherent responsibility in having the amana and the trust in your life. The third part is integrity, right? To carry the amana with integrity. What does that mean? Is to hold it to an utmost moral standard. When we operate in our day-to-day, how many times do we have to make a split decision that we know morally could be, one way or the other? And how many times are environmental or at least greater considerations being taken into place when making those decisions? So we need to really ask ourselves, when we're talking about specifically the trust point, what moral standard am I setting for myself as a Muslim when it comes to making these decisions? And then the last point is accountability. Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu always famously used to say, "Hasibu qabla an tuhasibu." Take account of yourself before you are held accountable on the Day of Judgment. And that's a great, tool to use when you're talking about the amana. Know that there will come a day where you will stand in front of Allah, and Allah Azza wa Jalla will ask you, I've given you this trust, I've given you this amana, what have you done with it? What have you done with this obligation that I've given you, not only to safeguard yourselves, but to safeguard the environment, the creatures? What have you done with this amana? So that's what true amana means. Those 4 things: the trust, the responsibility, and the integrity, and the accountability. All elements that are key in talking about this amana point. Okay, so we talked about the 3 big principles. What were they? Khalifa, Mizan, and amana. So those 3 things. And we said the last question that I want you to ask yourself when it comes to amana is, ask yourself at the crossroads, does this help me or harm me in fulfilling the trust from Allah? So there's 3 questions, there's 3 principles, and there's 3 questions that you ask yourself to make sure that you're factoring in those things, right? So I'm assuming now we're all experts. Let's put it to the test, okay? We're going to test our framework now that we've learned a bit about it with some scenarios. You guys ready for some scenarios? I told you, today is about practical. I'm trying not to bore you guys with just a bunch of theory. I want this to be interactive. I want this to be engaging. So I'm gonna try to get some engagement from here, okay? So let's talk about the first one. You're in the car. You had a really nice granola bar or Snickers or whatever you eat. You had a wrapper, and then you just cleaned the car. You're on an exit from the highway, and there's a pile of garbage that people throw things there all the time. Do you throw it out? No. My question is not, do you throw it out? Because at this point, all of you would have thrown it out. Which of the 3 principles, which question do you feel like this fails to, sorry, rephrase this. What is the question here that would stop you automatically from throwing this out of the garbage, out the window? Because there's 3 questions, there's 3 areas, right? Stewardship, Mizan, and Amana. Which of these do you think aligns with the most? Okay, how?
Because you're going to be thinking about how it's going to affect others. A lot of the consequences, like you said, how it's going to affect the future as well.
Great. Any other ones? We have more scenarios, so don't worry. You can try more. All right. That's a great point. So yes, when you're thinking about something like this, it may be insignificant to throw this something out the garbage. And subhanAllah, I try to come up with these scenarios because these are real scenarios that actually happens. And I know sometimes it seems comical, like who would throw something out the window? But how many times are you driving, do you see people throw things out the car? How many times do you see people, like we live in a very like farmy area. There's lots of highway exits. It's so, subhanAllah, the amount of garbage that you see. And the thing about when you throw garbage, specifically in areas where there's wetlands or there's lots of grass, is that those things may never get picked up again. And if you know about anything about like how these things decompose, that thing may be there forever, right? So I'm putting these scenarios. Sometimes these are comical, but realistically, these things happen. And I want you to not only ask yourselves, but the people around you. Make sure that you're holding them accountable also to the same kind of Islamic environmental ethics, okay? So we talked about this one aligns a lot with making sure that we're still doing the stewardship. Scenario 2. This didn't update. Okay, but let's do it. All right. You've been looking for a job for several months. And I know a lot of people that were in this position, certainly. And after looking and applying endlessly, you're suddenly offered a well-paying, we'll go with a well-paying job for an oil and gas company. Which principle would apply here?
Like your uncle?
You can. I'm not going to say names because I don't want to get sued. So let's just. But yes, it could be that. Which principle would be the one that applies the most here? Come on, guys, make me feel better about this. Or we're going to have to go back and revise. Okay. Amana, yes, Amana could work. Okay, explain it. It does. The integrity and the moral standard that's set by a Muslim working in a company that works in oil and gas. Same way you can talk about somebody, a Muslim, what's the integrity of a Muslim working at a weapons manufacturer, right? Knowing that they're going every day to contribute to something that's ultimately going to cause harm somewhere else in the planet. Anyone else? What other principles?
Yeah, so al-mizan is what you're taking, for example, oil from the ground and all these places and then converting it to carbon and taking it from this and then
Yeah,
dividing it.
that's another one. So what I said, al-mizan also is another factor because by ultimately contributing and fueling things like working in oil and gas, you're ultimately disrupting the greater mizan of what Allah has created by, but the need for more energy, more production, more economic development, that then you're saying, okay, you're justifying this action saying that I'm going to get this. But what we've learned so far is that that equation will never be equal because you may be doing great, but somebody else is suffering. And this is a great point that I didn't get to add before that I'm going to try to add it here, is sometimes we think about climate impacts only at a future point. But really, we actually have to think about it also in our current day and age. As a Muslim, as a human being that lives on this earth, subhanAllah, I can't tell you how many times I just have to turn off the news that I have coming sent to my email because of how much climate disasters are happening every day, especially in parts of the global south, whether it's back home, whether it's Somalia, whether it's back home in South Asia, anywhere. There's so many places on earth that are currently at this very moment experiencing climate disasters, and not because of anything that they've done, but it's mostly because of things that are happening outside of their countries and outside of their areas of influence. So always think about, remember what the hadith I left you guys with last class was that love for your brother what you love for yourself. And none of you truly believe until you love your brother what you love for yourself. And that hadith shows you a lot about knowing and being cognizant of the pain of your Muslim brothers and sisters in other places in the world, and making that a factor in your decision making today. Okay, so great. Both amana and mizan, I think, perfectly apply in stopping you from going forward in this decision. All right. Yeah, this didn't update, but I'll leave it. Wijhah is hosting a tree planting event, and it's on Saturday, which is the same day that the Blue Jays are having their series deciding playoff game. Which one would make you, which principle is a factor here? I say this because I know that the Blue Jays are playing right now. Come on, this one should be the easiest one. It has a leaf in the Somebody who hasn't answered yet, because I want more people, new people. No clue? Huh? All right. You want to go?
I would say stewardship because we kind of have an obligation to do something better than going to do it.
Yes, right. Where in this scenario, being a true Khalifa is that you take the option of, there's so many things that you could be doing. There's so many things that you could be working towards and spending your time doing. And I put that because honestly, there's a lot of times where people who they're trying to do good things. They're trying to do elements of where they're trying to show people how to make a connection between Islam and the environment and nature, but it's always competing with 100 other things. And unless we prioritize doing Islamic environmental action, it's never going to be a priority, right? So we have to, at least make an effort. And I say this because my hope is that inshallah we will be organizing a tree planting event soon. And I hope that all of you do come out to that, because I really do think that there's as you said, this is part of our worship now, right? This is something that we're going to use going forward as a framework to say, what am I doing that's a benefit to my Muslim brothers and sisters? What am I doing that's going to ensure that there's a more habitable world for my Muslim brothers and sisters to come, right? So using that framework, you inshallah will be hopefully ready, first people to sign up, inshallah, for that type of event. I had more scenarios, but I'm going to move on to the next bit, which is to maintain it. Because we can sit here and I could go through what is Islamic environmental ethics, how to connect Islam in the environment. I can tell you why it's important. I can tell you how to establish it. But as we are Muslims, as we are human beings, our iman fluctuates. In the same way, our willingness to be able to do this work fluctuates. And the hadith that I'm going to share is it's the hadith that actually comes up very often when you talk about Islam and the environment that I have not used yet. And I haven't used it strategically because I want it to be the last hadith we talk about. There are so many gems and lessons from this one hadith that I wanted to leave it at the last point, because this hadith gives me a lot of hope. As somebody who's been in the climate space for a while, and I've seen the ups and downs, sometimes it get very, I wouldn't say depressing, but sometimes it gets very daunting, where you feel like you're doing so much, but every time things don't just move the right direction. People just don't listen. So I left this at the last point because this is honestly the hadith that I feel is the best way to maintain Islamic environmental ethics in your life. Okay? So this hadith is narrated by Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu. He says that the Prophet ﷺ said, even if the hour of the resurrection was established upon you, one of you, while he has in his hand a sapling, let him plant it. And I can't tell you guys how much I love this hadith, because it has so many lessons and gems that just they keep me afloat in this long, endless battle of trying to get people to be more environmentally conscious. And we'll go through some of them. The first one I want to talk about is that, when the Prophet ﷺ is instructing us, even when the hour is upon you, if you have a sapling in here, plant it, shows you again never to underestimate the scale, like what your actions are going to be like on the Day of Judgment. How that small sapling, at the end of the day, that could be your key to Jannah. Just that small thing at the end of the line. And the other beautiful thing that connects to this is that, the context of it being the final hour means that this tree is not going to grow to its maturity. Yet, you're going to get rewarded, inshallah, for that tree. And it's because of the intentions and the belief in that this is something that Allah Azza wa Jal, through Prophet has instructed us to do, that I'm going to do this action. And there's the biggest thing that I take away from this is that sometimes this climate movement can get very daunting, where you're trying to do things and you just feel like it's for naught. You're like, Hashem, why are you telling me to recycle? There's corporations that are polluting 10 times more than me every hour. Why do you care what I do, Hashem? Or there's people that come around and they say things like, Did you know that because I drive a Tesla, I'm the best person on earth? No, right? And there's things that people do that say that they're trying to basically, they try to absolve themselves of guilt in saying, listen, I don't need to do all these actions because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is going to happen. But the Prophet ﷺ here is teaching us that you need to do everything in your power until the last minute to be able to try to do khair. And the other thing that I really take from this hadith is that it being the final, like when the hour is being established, that time period is described in the Quran. That time is people are going to be in chaos. Like it's described in the Quran that even the woman who's pregnant will give birth, right? Like she'll go into labor just because of the sheer stress of that event. And even at that time, the Prophet ﷺ is still doing what? He's still instructing us to do what? To plant that seed. Because the circumstances are never a justification to say, listen, we can't do something. Like there's not going to be a time more difficult than when the hour is being established. Yet the Prophet ﷺ is instructing us to plant that sapling. So in our current day to age, when people are sit down, you sit back and you say, listen, the climate, it's a tough time, Hashem. It's cost of living crisis out there. People don't got jobs. It's cost is up. Hashem, I need to order things from Amazon because there's no cheaper way to get it. Hashem, like, listen, I know you told me that I can't get my matcha lattes, but listen, that's the cheapest place, right? There's so many things that you can make excuses for by saying, listen, it's just this time period. It's just a circumstance. But think about that. At every point in history, people would have had that same excuse. And that you need to be cognizant that on the day of judgment, when you're standing there, it's going to be between you and Allah. And your actions and what your intentions were and how you acted is really going to be the deciding factor. So when people say like, this action is fruitless, you go back and you refer to this ayah. I know last week I talked about this, but I remember when I was doing this workshop at camp, and the young woman that came up to me and said, you're doing this workshop about climate change, and my parents told me that Allah said that the world's gonna get destroyed anyway, so why do we care? I didn't know this hadith at that time, but I wish I did, because this hadith has so many. It teaches us that it's not about the result. It's about the effort. And that's the beauty of Islam when it comes to these type of efforts, is that Allah Azza wa Jalla is not holding any of us to account on the result. What Allah Azza wa Jalla is doing is asking us to put in the effort that corresponds to it. So I may never see a world where climate change is not destroying it in my lifetime. And subhanAllah, reading this hadith, it makes me feel that, I understand that that's okay. Because I know that every day I'm going to try to strive, I'm going to try to do everything that I can, even if it's small, to make the world a better place. And I may not do it every day. Some days I may do it, some day I might slip. Some day I might not be able to do it. But that will not stop me from coming back the day after and going right back into it and making actions that are environmentally conscious. Right? There's so many ways Shaitan will play with your mind to say, why are you going to care about, this wrapper that you can throw out the window? Yesterday you bought a Tim Hortons cup and look where you don't even know where that cup is. Or it will tell you, listen, why you care if you buy from Amazon? You just took a flight yesterday. Man, this mic is giving me so much trouble. But you get what I'm saying? Like Shaitan will always try to play the game that will tell you that your actions are worthless. And if anything that these hadith and these ayat have taught us is that your actions are always going to be worth something on the day of judgment. So we must keep cognizant of that and always understand the spirit of what we're trying to do when we're trying to establish our Islamic environmental ethics, is that we're not going to change the world overnight. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, like, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah Azza wa Jalla says that He's not going to change the state of a people until they change what's in themselves. So we need to start with ourselves, right? And I start with myself and my family all the time. My family gets on to you. I'm like, yo, are y'all composting? Are y'all recycling? Are you doing these things? Because they may say, none of this matters, but it will matter on the day of judgment because we know what we're doing is right. And some people know they're doing these actions and they know it's wrong, right? And I feel for the brothers, and these are all tests from Allah. These are all tests for us, right? All of these things, and we talked about the ayah before, like how the corruption has spread so that Allah can show us the consequence of our actions that we may return to Him, right? There's so many things that we can do. Like whether you get, if an example of somebody who didn't get a job for so long, and then they get a job that they know is morally questionable, that they know they shouldn't be doing, right? That is a test from Allah for you to make the right decision. The same way that there's so many things that you may want. You may want that new dress. You may want that new thobe. You may want those new shoes. You may want that new car. You may want that, new hijab. But really ask yourself, is this something that I truly need? And remember, ask yourself those 3 questions. Whose rights am I taking from this, right? Where am I taking from? Is this helping me fulfill the trust that Allah has given me? So keep trying to ask yourself those 3 questions when you're at those crossroads. I hope that now, inshallah, whenever you're about to make a decision, especially when it comes to either buying things, using things, whether these big decisions, you stop for a second, just pause and think about these things that we just talked about. And if you're able to ask yourself those questions and come to a satisfactory conclusion, inshallah, you would have properly implemented Islamic environmental ethics. Okay? So, inshallah, I'm going to leave you guys with that. The quick recap is we went over what is Islamic environmental ethics, why it's important. We talked about people who live with it and live without it. We talked about how to establish it through those 3 principles of Khalifa, maintaining the mizan, and fulfilling the trust that Allah Azza wa Jalla has given us, and how to maintain it by understanding that at the end of the day, it's not about the result, it's about the actions that we take, and that Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to reward us for every action that we take. And that at the end of the day, if you are somebody who's trying your best, every day you're struggling, this is a jihad of nafs, you're really trying your best to fight against this consumption culture, you're trying your best to fight against this more and more culture, this current push of society to eat more, consume more, spend more, and you're doing your best, then inshallah Allah rewards you for that. And that inshallah is your key to Jannah. The same way we talked about that, the person who goes to Jannah, who went to Jannah just because they brought water to a thirsty dog, just for the way that the person went to Jannah for removing a harm from the road. Inshallah, Allah allows us to enter Jannah through the actions that we take for His sake and His sake alone. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. جزاكم الله خيرا everyone for coming to this. I know this is it's not a topic that you guys usually hear, but I really appreciate you guys coming out and really learning about Islam and the environment. And hopefully we have more discussions. I told you the challenge for today is that don't leave today without asking somebody what they've learned, what they're inshallah going to implement. I would love to hear more about this if you guys want to talk about it. So inshallah, thank you all for coming. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.